So, you've probably all heard the news by now. Really significant. Pope Francis has died. He was 88.
Yes, the announcement came from the Vatican Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, just this morning, Monday. And it's major news globally.
Absolutely. The reactions are already pouring in. I mean, President Trump ordered flags to half-staff in the U.S., and you're seeing statements from, King Charles, former Presidents Trump, and Biden, the UN Secretary General. It just shows his reach, doesn't it?
It really does. And what strikes me is that Vice President J.D. Vance actually met with him just yesterday.
Wow, really? Just yesterday?
Yeah. It puts a very sort of personal and immediate angle on it, shows how active he was right up to the end.
That's incredible. So, okay, for this deep dive, we really want to unpack this. What happens right now? What defined Pope Francis's time leading the church? And, what might be next?
Right.
So let's start with the immediate aftermath. What are the very first steps that are happening now at the Vatican?
Well, the key figure right now is the Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Farrell. He basically steps in to run the Vatican's day-to-day affairs until a new pope is elected.
Okay, so he's the interim administrator, essentially.
Exactly. He's the steward for this period. And one of the very first things, very solemn, is the official verification of death. That's scheduled for later today.
How does that work? Is it just a medical confirmation, or?
It's actually quite ritualistic. Tradition dictates the Camerlengo calls out the Pope's baptismal name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, 3 times.
3 times?
3 times. If there's no response, that's the formal confirmation. It's a very old, very powerful moment.
I can imagine. And then what after that confirmation?
A few things happen pretty quickly. Symbolically, the Pope's fisherman's ring, which he used to seal documents, and his lead seal, the bulla, are destroyed, usually broken or defaced.
Why do they do that?
It signifies the end of his reign, his pontificate, and prevents anyone from, misusing his authority after his death.
Makes sense.
And at the same time, his private papal apartments are sealed off.
Okay, to secure them, personal effects, maybe a will?
Precisely. It secures everything inside. Then the focus shifts to the mourning process. Pope Francis's body will lie in repose for a bit, likely near his residence.
And then public viewing.
Yes, the plan is to move his remains to St. Peter's Basilica. A Vatican spokesperson suggested that might start as early as Wednesday morning, so the faithful can pay their respects.
Right. And there's a longer official mourning period, too, isn't there?
There is. After the funeral, there's a 9-day period called the Novendiale. It's dedicated to prayers and masses for the repose of his soul.
Got it. Okay, so that covers the immediate procedures. Let's shift focus now to his time as Pope. His election in 2013, that was huge, wasn't it? Really broke the mold.
Oh, absolutely historic. First Jesuit Pope ever, first Pope from the Americas, first from the Southern Hemisphere, and the first non-European in, over 1,000 years.
Yeah, it signaled a real shift right from the start.
Definitely. It brought a different perspective, shaped by Ignatian spirituality and his Argentinian background.
Bishop Barron, I saw his comments. He highlighted mercy and evangelization as key themes for Francis. How did those play out?
That's a great summary. Francis constantly talked about the church as a field hospital, tending to the wounded.
Right, meeting people where they are.
Exactly. It was less about condemnation first and more about showing the merciful face of Christ, as he often put it. This tied directly into his idea of evangelization, not forcing doctrine, but attracting people through joy and encounter.
And he also tried to tackle some internal church issues, reforms.
Yes. Reform was definitely on his agenda. He pushed for a big overhaul of the Vatican Bank, trying to bring more transparency there. That was a long-standing issue.
And the abuse crisis.
He definitely confronted that, inherited it really, but took steps, put new procedures in place, aimed for more accountability, though, critics argue about how effective it all was. It remained a deep wound.
His tone on some social issues felt different, too, compared to Benedict or John Paul II.
It did. He took a much more, shall we say, pastoral approach towards divorced and remarried Catholics, suggesting paths for reintegration. And the language regarding gay people, who am I to judge? That famous line.
Yeah, that got a lot of attention.
Huge attention. But it's important to note, he didn't change core doctrines. On abortion, women's ordination, the church's fundamental teachings remained firm. It was more about the tone, the emphasis, the welcome.
Which must have caused some friction internally.
Oh, definitely. His approach, seen as more progressive by some, certainly clashed with more conservative elements in the church. Think about his restrictions on the old Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass.
Right, that was controversial.
Very. And his critiques of sort of unchecked capitalism also didn't sit well with everyone. There were clear tensions and debates throughout his papacy.
He also canonized a lot of people, made a lot of saints.
He did, nearly 1,000. Now, a big chunk of that was a single group, the Martyrs of Otranto from the 15th century.
Ah, okay.
But still, it showed an emphasis on holding up examples of faith for people today.
And his travels, his appointments of cardinals that seemed very intentional, very global.
Absolutely unprecedented, really. He visited places no pope had ever gone before, especially in the peripheries, and his cardinal appointments dramatically shifted the geographical balance of the College of Cardinals.
More representation from Asia, Africa, Latin America.
Exactly.
Wow.
Fewer from Europe, particularly Italy. And since those cardinals elect the next pope, that's a legacy with potentially huge future impact.
He was also very vocal on the environment. The Green Pope, they called him.
Yes, his encyclical Laudato Si was landmark, really pushed care for creation onto the agenda.
But on other life issues,
That's the interesting thing. While he was strong on the environment, on things like population control, abortion, euthanasia, he was very much in line with his predecessors, John Paul II and Benedict. It wasn't an across-the-board alignment with secular green movement.
on abortion specifically, he used incredibly strong language.
Extremely strong. Called it homicidal, compared it to hiring a hitman. There was no ambiguity there, even while he spoke of mercy elsewhere. It was a consistent, firm line.
What about this airplane magisterium I've heard mentioned? Those press conferences on the plane.
Ah, yes. He loved doing those impromptu Q&As with journalists on papal flights. It made him seem accessible, spontaneous.
Right.
But sometimes the off-the-cuff remarks could be a bit ambiguous or maybe not doctrinally precise enough for some. It often led to the Vatican press office having to issue clarifications afterwards. Sort of what the Pope meant to say was.
Right, I can see how that could cause confusion. And what about his early call to make a mess?
Yeah, that was at World Youth Day in Brazil, early in his papacy. He told young people to shake things up, get involved, don't be passive.
How was that taken?
Well, it energized many who wanted change and renewal. But others worried it was encouraging disruption, maybe undermining tradition or authority. It became one of those phrases that sort of defined the differing reactions to his style.
It seems like projecting a more open, merciful image of the church was really central for him.
I think that's fair to say. A conscious effort to move away from a perception of the church as perhaps rigid or judgmental towards one of welcome and compassion.
And kind of unusually, he had these connections with Hollywood figures.
He did. Met with Leonardo DiCaprio about environmental issues, met the Clooneys, Angelina Jolie, Mark Wahlberg. It was part of his sort of broad engagement with culture, perhaps trying to reach different audiences.
Interesting. Okay, let's pivot to the reactions now. We mentioned Trump and Biden earlier. Their statements felt quite different in tone.
They did. Trump's was shorter, rest in peace, good man, loved the world. Biden's was much longer, calling him the people's pope, emphasizing his focus on the marginalized, the environment, interfaith dialogue, different framing.
And King Charles, he mentioned meeting Francis recently, too.
Yes, he spoke of his profound sadness, recalled their meetings warmly, and specifically mentioned Francis's concern for Christian unity and, again, care for the natural world, a shared interest.
And condolences from further afield. Australia, the UN.
Yeah, Australian PM Albanese noted him being the first from the Southern Hemisphere, talked about his message of hope. UN Secretary General Guterres called him a beacon, recalled his UN address in 2015.
Obama's statement was quite striking, too.
It was. He called Francis a rare leader who made us want to be better people. Very personal reflection on his humility and service.
And within the church itself, Cardinal Dolan in New York.
Cardinal Dolan reflected on the timing near Easter, a time of resurrection. He noted people were already gathering at St. Patrick's Cathedral to mourn. Bishop Barron, as we mentioned, stressed that theme of mercy and evangelization again.
And the U.S. Bishops' Conference.
They issued a statement expressing unity in prayer for the Pope and for the Church during this transition.
It's also poignant timing regarding next year, 2025.
It really is. 2025 is a Jubilee year, a holy year. Pope Francis had already kicked it off by opening the Holy Door at St. Peter's. His passing now casts, well, a different light on this period that was meant to be focused on pilgrimage and renewal.
Okay, so the big question now. What happens next in choosing his successor? The conclave. It's famously secretive, isn't it?
Extremely. All the cardinals under the age of 80 gather in the Sistine Chapel, and the term conclave literally means with key, they are locked in.
Locked in. Wow. No contact with the outside world.
Pretty much. Strict rules to prevent any external influence or lobbying. They live and vote inside that sealed-off area until a new pope is elected.
How does the voting actually work?
It's by secret ballot. They can hold up to 4 ballots a day, 2 morning, 2 afternoon. They keep voting until someone gets a 2/3 majority.
2/3. That ensures broad support, I guess.
That's the idea. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes not so much.
And while there's no pope who's running the shop day to day, besides the Camerlengo handling the transition specifics.
It's interesting, most heads of the Vatican departments, the dicasteries, automatically lose their jobs when the pope dies.
Really? Everyone?
Almost everyone. A few key officials stay on, like the major penitentiary, who deals with certain confessional matters, and the vicar general for Rome. But most of the curia leadership is vacant until the new pope appoints them.
How long did these conclaves usually last? You hear stories.
They vary hugely. Francis himself was elected in just over 24 hours, only 5 ballots. Benedict XVI, just 4 ballots. But historically, some have dragged on for months, even years. The longest was almost 3 years back in the 13th century.
3 years. Wow. Okay, speculation is always rife, but are there names being mentioned as potential successors? Frontrunners, maybe.
It's always tricky, the saying goes, he who enters the conclave a pope leaves a cardinal. But yes, names are definitely discussed. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Italian Secretary of State, is often mentioned. He's very experienced in diplomacy administration.
Okay, anyone else?
Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle from the Philippines. He's very well regarded, heads the Vatican's evangelization department, seen as pastoral, theologically sharp.
And what about the idea of a pope from Africa? That seems to come up more and more.
It does, and for good reason. The church is growing rapidly in Africa, and African cardinals are increasingly influential. You hear names like Cardinal Fridolin and Bongo Basungu from the DRC,
Right.
Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana, who's held important Vatican posts, and Cardinal Robert Serra from Guinea, though he's seen as much more traditionalist, which might appeal to a different group of electors.
So definitely a possibility. Now, why do popes take a new name? Francis chose Francis, obviously, but it's a tradition.
It is. It started way back, maybe the 6th century. Sometimes it was because the Pope's birth name sounded pagan. Later, it became a way to honor a predecessor, or like Francis choosing Francis of Assisi, to signal the kind of papacy they intended: poverty, peace, care for creation.
And no one takes Peter.
Nope, out of respect for the first Pope, St. Peter, that name is considered off limits.
We also heard Francis had specific wishes for his burial. Not in the usual place.
That's right. He expressed a desire to be buried in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, not in the grottos under St. Peter's like most recent popes.
Any reason why?
It has personal significance for him, connected to his grandparents, and he had a deep devotion to the icon of Mary housed there. And interestingly, he approved revised funeral rites that actually allow future popes to be buried outside the Vatican, too.
So that could be a change going forward. What's the general time frame we're looking at for electing the new pope?
Usually, the conclave starts 15 to 20 days after the pope's death. That allows cardinals to travel to Rome. Then the voting begins. So typically, you might expect a new pope roughly 2, maybe 3 weeks after the funeral.
Okay. And finally, any word on the specific cause of death? He had been ill recently.
There's been some reporting citing medical analysts like Dr. Mark Siegel at Fox News, suggesting sources point to a respiratory failure event, which would align with his recent battle with pneumonia. The hospital stays we heard about seems plausible given his history.
Right. So wrapping up, it's clearly a huge moment. The death of Pope Francis marks the end of a really significant, often debated papacy. And it triggers this ancient, complex process to choose his successor.
Exactly. His legacy, the focus on mercy, the reforms, the global outreach, the internal tensions that will all be debated for a long time. And now the church looks to the future.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Given everything Pope Francis tried to do, the way the church is changing globally, what kind of leader comes next? What qualities will the cardinals prioritize this time? And which parts of Francis's impact will really stick? That's something for everyone, Catholic or not, to think about as the world watches Rome.